is an absolute pleasure to be here at Purpose Conference once again. I think it's our 5th Purpose Conference that I've been to, and it's amazing to see some familiar faces and change makers in the room and some new faces as well. I am Tim O'Brien, the founder of Purpose Made. We are a consulting firm that helps organisations embed real change, and we do that through systemic work in terms of designing new ways of finance. We also do that through the challenge of impact measurement, and we help organisations become B Corps. But first, I'd like to recognise the traditional owners on which we stand today, the Gadigal people, and acknowledge leaders past, present and emerging. Also recognise that sovereignty was never ceded and that it always will be and always was Aboriginal land. We have a very exciting lineup today, and I have had the privilege of meeting all 3 of them. Actually, there's 4 of them. What we're going to do is we're going to hear a little bit from me, and I'm going to tell a little story, and a story about probably the most challenging time in my career when I was made to feel extremely uncomfortable. Following that, we're going to hear for 20 minutes from Girrawah and Chris from the Waluwin Foundation to understand what and how to go about Indigenous-Designed finance. We're then going to hear from Lisa Miller from Wedgetail about regenerative finance, the work she's doing with First Nations people across the world. And then hear from Sasha Courville from Bank Australia about how to embed a couple of these important principles in mainstream banking. I think we heard from this morning some really powerful storytelling. And I think it's important to acknowledge the time that we're in as a generation. We have a responsibility to the little people, and I have 2 little children, and we're facing an extreme crisis around biodiversity loss, increasing climate change, and growing inequity gaps. It's costing lives now, and it's going to cost future generations' lives. What we need to do is to create change, and the way to create that change is to make ourselves feel uncomfortable so we can see differently, look at our businesses, look at the economies, and start to design things in new ways. And I'm going to tell you a challenging story for myself. Part of this story isn't my story to tell, because I was working with some elders on country up in far north Queensland, but I want to give you some of the context behind it to explain then the experience I had. So, I think it was 6 years ago, setting up my business, which was called Hatch, now it's called Purpose Made. We got a call from an Indigenous elder who runs this extraordinary business and said, we want a consultant to come up and we need a help. So I was invited up onto this country, and flew into Mount Isa, drove 2.5 hours north. We turned up and there was this sea of helicopters, cars, and I was like, what the heck is going on here? We turned up and Malcolm Turnbull, ex-Prime Minister, was there visiting this community. And in this community was this extraordinary businesses that were created. So this elder had gone through, since his youth, land was taken from him, huge challenges for his community, his mob had experienced. And deep intergenerational suffering had happened in this country. And he had built this extraordinary enterprise up on country to bring people back out, his people back out, to empower them through mental health, physical health, to build self-empowered jobs, and actually had built a whole new enterprise around spinifex and harvesting that to go into plastics and create this amazing circular economy solution. And he needed help. He needed help from someone that could understand how to build a new model of collaboration that infused Indigenous wisdom with the Western economy to think about how things could shift and change. And that was myself. So we found ourselves up in this community on the table with Malcolm Turnbull, hearing stories of his community and how the work that he had set up and the work that was done in that country had changed people. And it was extraordinary. But that's not the story I wanted to tell today. It's a story of my experience doing that. So going on out into this community, this area around this deep mistrust with recognising that I'm a privileged white person. And all of the work that I had done previously, I needed to throw it out. It needed to be removed. I needed to rethink, I needed to rewire, I needed to get deeply uncomfortable and sit, listen, learn, and just be there to help. And through that experience, I was challenged around everything that I knew about the economy, how business worked, and had to basically rethink everything that I had done. And that made me feel deeply uncomfortable, but it empowered me as an individual to think about how I can contribute and how I could contribute to the mission of this organisation. So I want to invite you all to get uncomfortable, to go out and have experiences, to see different perspectives and rethink the work that you're doing every day in order to tackle nature and regenerative finance that we need, and also think about how we can infuse the work we're doing with First Nations and Indigenous wisdom. Now, that's enough from me. We've got our first speaker coming up, or first speakers coming up, which is super exciting. What I'd like to now to do is invite Girrawah and Chris from the Waluwin Foundation. Welcome, Chris and Girrawah.
You just stand here.
Yes, sir. I'm going to sit.
Amandangu, Wurrugawurri Maranya. Thank you, everyone. Yuandu Paul Girrawah House. My name is Paul Girrawah House. Nadu Maradu Mare Biringu, Gujigangu Nyambri Nurumbango. I was born on the centre of my ancestral country at the old Canberra Hospital. God bless it. Anyone born in the old Canberra Hospital? Great to see hospital alumni here today. Nadu Baladu Nyambri Cambri Woglu Wallabaloa Nyambri Wiradri Gibi. I'm a Nyambri Cambri Woglu Wallabaloa Wiradri man. Yinjamarabala Nama, Dr. Matilda Williams House. My respects to my mother, Dr. Matilda Williams House, because of her. Yinjamarabala Auntie Nadine Dixon, traditional owner country. So, Yilingalangbu, Agibabungu, Wogabu, Migabu, Didanilbang mean. Ladies and gentlemen, young men, young women, distinguished guests, Nyari Injamali, Gadigal, Mujigang, Yanangbu, Jayandu. My respects to Gadigal ancestors, past and present. Nyari Njamarabu, Mujigangu, Nurumbanjigu, Ninya Yiridu. My respects to all people and First Nation people from all parts of the country. Nadu Wurugabigi, Balabambu Gubu, Balagi Bangubu, Guinguliala Dumbali now Murway Marambu. We listen to the old people, the ancestors, the elders, and they show us the right path, the good path, the straight path. Dulugang Muru, straight path. Guinguliala, Bilingali now, Yamamali now, Walamali now. They nurture us, they guide us, they protect us, our elders, our ancestors, our old people. Mambawara na Minyagu, Wuragabinya Wuradarego, Winingala Gubaligo, looking to see, listening to hear, and learning to understand. Nyani Yinjamali Nurabangila Balanin Waluwin, Galanga Bangbo Yaningingo, Nyani Mawang Yao Biligi Gila Yaman Bilgiri Yani, Marambo Bagregan Yaningingo. We look after country so it is healthy for all our children, and we teach and we learn what is right for all on country. Murun Maginya Yinjamara, Muramuru Wirimbira Nuramango. Living a respectful way of life cares for country. Yinjamara Wirimbira Marando Gobo, Giira Gobo, Yando Gobo. Respect is taking responsibility for the now, the past, the present, and the future. Yinjamal Gijul, Waluwin, Mayin Waluwin Nurambango. Healthy people, healthy country. Yinjamara, Yinjamal Gijul, Niani Gingu, Muyalang, Wiradri Nyambri Cambri. Respects to our old people and country. It's because of them I'm here. It's because of our matriarchs I'm here. The old people, Dulubang, the straight path they gave us. Yinjamal Gijul, powerful word in Wiradri, and it means many good things. To go slow, be patient, be polite, be gentle, and take responsibility. Yinjamara bala wala mwanga dabu, murun madan dabu, bamayu guru gambiro bango nara nara. Respect is in the grinding stones and the carved trees made long ago on country. Yinjamara bala bidada bina bina bina, ya willowu wuruwin nurambango, magagiri biringa bogogu diranda. Respect is in the rivers and the creeks and the breeze quietly moving through country. It can be found in the journey of the bogong moths in the mountains. Guinguliala Wijinga Wangara Daganda Bapa Yirinigo. It's in how our matriarchs dig for yams in Mother Earth. Guinguliala, Wagadai Nanu, Dangawa, Boomira Daganda. It's in the soles of the feet of our dancers on country. So we talk about country, Nurumbang, Dara, Daganda, country, land, our story. Under the concrete of our cities and our countries, there's a rich, powerful, compelling First Nation Indigenous history, a 65,000 plus history, which is now a shared history that belongs to all of us. And we all have a responsibility in looking after country. Yinjamal Gijo Mayangalangbu, Yandu Mayangalangdu. Yinjamal Gijo Nyinyagir talks about the law of the land, giving respect and honour to all people from all parts of the country, being patient, being polite, being gentle. Yinjamara Muran Waginya Wirambira Burudurai, respect everything living and growing. I'd like to acknowledge my old people here, my mother, Dr. Matilda Williams House. My mother here in the possum skin cloak is the current 2023 National Senior Female Elder of the Year, NAIDOC Senior Female Elder of the Year. My mother was the first Indigenous Australian to be awarded an honorary doctorate from the ANU just recently as 2017. And we were gifted the opportunity last year to open Federal Parliament at the 47th opening of Federal Parliament, and the opening first ever at the 42nd and the 43rd and the 44th. And I'd like to acknowledge my grandfather, my great-grandfather here, my great-great-grandfather. I've got 7 generations here, but I have another generation. I'm a grandfather. I have 3 grandsons. They're not in this image here. My daughter's here at 21 next month, my 2 twin girls. So Dirango, the importance, Niawe Gunungiju of our identity, the Maramara, the action we take, Nina, this in here, Nina, which is the focus, and the Yayawana, which is the transformation of us all on country. Maragaladal, Walan Mayan, Mayangalang, we hold fast to each other, we empower the people. Walan Gunmala, Maramaragurai, be brave, make change. Diriyawana, Murawara, Nawanbira, we get up, we stand up, and we show up. Maramara, Nya Nya, Girama Maranya, respect shapes us and lifts up the people. Wirai Nyang, Wirai Mayin. No language, no people. Our language comes from Mother Earth. It's what we describe as it's a free word order structure. It comes out of the ground, gifted by the old people. Yinjamara Bala Bayami, Walla Mara Mara Maradain, Umbe Yukenbrak, Yibai Mullian. Our creator Bayami, our creator and protector, gifted us our language here on country, the Wiradjuri language. In language, the word Wiradjuri, any Wiradjuri people here in the room today? Marambang Malang, that's very good. Noi Goi Malang, it's beautiful to have language for our people still alive on country. Malangari Yerwang, alive, Nurambang on country. So the free word order structure of language is about the provenance story. We talk about the provenance of our people's connection to country, like we've cared for Mother Earth since the dawn of time, and evidence of our occupation, our sovereignty, our ownership can be seen everywhere throughout the land. Our signature is in the land, not just our DNA, and taking care of country is important to us, it's crucial. We don't own or control any land. We don't have freehold title in our great Wiradjuri estate. We have collective title under land rights, New South Wales Aboriginal Land Rights Act, and we don't have native title determinations yet. But these are all legal instruments created by non-Aboriginal people to subjugate our people and control our people. So what we're seeking is an Indigenous finance model. We talk about obtaining freehold title, just like the non-Aboriginal property owner next door, where we can open and shut the gate on our terms, freehold title. With respect. Our ancestors, our elders, our old people never gave this country up, never ceded sovereignty. Our land was stolen without consent or treaty, and we've never been compensated for these losses. And in the Murray-Darling Basin, our people don't own or control any piece of land except for a collective title, which is highly regulated. highly controlled and governed and stifled by the colonial process we see. So we're limited. We're still on the fringe and we're still fighting for survival. I'll just go back here. So language, we have the oldest living language in the world, and we can talk about, and with that we talk about the acceptance versus rejection of our people on country, the acceptance, the love, the respect, the safety, the belonging, the sacrifice, the security, the morals, the values, the nurturing, the sheltering, and the caring and sharing. That comes from time immemorial. That comes through Yinjimarra. We'll see Yinjimarra a little bit more here. Yinjimarra, they go slow, be patient, be polite, be gentle, and take responsibility. It's a way of life on country for us all. Yinjimarra, Maramara, Wininga, Gigalana, Nurumbang Mayin. Respect creates people who care for each other and care for country. The image here of my great-great-grandfather, Henry Black Harry Williams, is at a place called Girrawah Station in the ACT. Our people first met Europeans in the 1820s, coming into the ACT from Girrawah, which is rebadged and branded as Lake George. Macquarie declared martial law on our people, Wiradjuri people, Cambry people, Nyambri people, Gundungurra people, but our people fought hard for survival, fought hard for identity, and fought hard to keep and maintain language. Against all the odds, we're still here in this country, and we talk about that acceptance versus the rejection, the grief, the loss, the neglect, the abandonment. It just goes on and on since the arrival of first boat people in Sydney Cove in 1788. So every day is a fight for survival. Every day is a fight for our identity, recognition on country, the dispossession, the historical dispossession, and the intergenerational trauma that comes through, and the lateral violence from that today. The odds are stacked against us. The deck is stacked and the cards are marked, but we keep fighting. We never give up. We never give up fighting for our rights in this country, for our human rights. So our people who through law and custom hold cultural knowledge and we continue to maintain deep respect for our ancestral lands and waters. We want to see our children grow up in a society that acknowledges, respects and honours First Nation people in this country. And we believe we're entitled to a greater share in the wealth and prosperity. So we want to return our people back home to country. We can't have healthy country unless our people are sitting back on country, living on country, looking after country, and enjoying the rights to country under freehold title as opposed to a collective title, as we know, stifles the whole process for our people. So we're talking about the original story coming in time to what we call that dispossession and the non-creation of intergenerational wealth. So where is the intergenerational wealth from dispossession of our people and country, our land and resources? It's not there. So we want to be able to hand over some wealth and prosperity to our children, our grandchildren moving into the future, and create and lay that foundation down like everyone else in this country enjoys. Most people do, especially the non-Aboriginal people in this country. So with that, Noi Goi Malang, Marambanggalang, we talk about Nurumbang Wamara, the nation building. So I'm essentially talking about nation building here on Niaway Gunangidjul, the nation building of people, Mayan of people. The images of my old people are very important to us all. We talk about, we all have parents, grandparents, and they're very special to us because they open Maramara Muru. They created the pathways for us to be here, Muruwaro, on track. So we stay on track regardless of the subjugation and the oppression of our people throughout time. And we do that based on Yinjimarra, the mutual respect. Nyang language, powerful. It's compelling and it grounds us the country. So the intergenerational wealth creation. So we're looking, Chris is going to talk here about how do we create intergenerational wealth through creating and designing Indigenous finance model. So we're going to move on here. So Waluwin bala niawai ginang giju nulangana murwa nurambang mayin wayara bala wirambira murun nani nuwa nurambangong. So Waluwin purpose is to return Aboriginal people back to productive, sustainable life on country. And the only way to do that is our people go back home, open the farm gate and close the farm gate on our terms under freehold title. So Umba Yukunrak Yibai Mullian respects to our key totems on country, the crow and the eagle, and we have these stories of country. Our stories connect us to country. They're our identity. It's part of nation building. Nurambang Wamara Niawai Gunung Gijul. This here image is of the Gondwaras. Also, they've been rebadged. All country has been rebadged and rebranded with European versions of our language. So it's about reclaiming sovereignty, in a way a de facto relationship, a de facto sovereignty on country with the coloniser. It's not an easy thing to do, it takes time. So, and we're very patient. We've been patient for over 200 years in this country for recognition. We're still not recognised. We're still not accepted, but we acknowledge, the 5.5 million people who supported our people through the Yes campaign. Nawa, in language, Nawa means yes. In Wirai means no. Wirai Durai, not having. Wiradri comes two words, Wirai Durai. Wirai no, Durai having, or not having. And it was a word our old people used when Lawson and Blaxland come over the Blue Mountains. It was almost a protest word. We have nothing here. Go back where you come from. We've lots of stories about country. Jumbak, the sheep. Yiramang, the horse. It just goes on and on. Stories that connect and relate us to country. So with that, finally, my mother, Dr. Auntie Matilda Williams House, because of her I can, and because of all our matriarchs we can right across this country. Our family was part of the founding family, created the Aboriginal Tent Embassy in 1972. And throughout time, Mum, 2006 Canberra Citizen of the Year. So my mother, Maradu Dirangambira, Arambi Guwara, Hollywood Nurang, Yambri Nurang, my mother is the oldest of 10 children and born and raised on a dirt floor under the White Australia policy of the Aboriginal Protection Act here on country. All our people were moved and herded onto reserves and missions to be controlled and manipulated here on country, around the country throughout New South Wales. Waluwin Mayin, Waluwin Nurumbango. Healthy people, healthy country. Murawagal, the decision, the creation of pathways on the country. Malangara Yerwong, alive and strong on country. I'm going to hand over to Chris. Thank you. Mandangu.
So we got you in on the hook of Indigenous-Designed finance, and you've sat through the design process because you can't design something without hearing a story, and unless you listen to the story. So Wiradjuri have Wadadure, which is a word for clever, but it means having ears. So you have ears, you listen and you design. And I guess mine is the boring white fella story, which is how do you take that story and design finance to match it? How do you take Girrawah's story and you turn it into something that fits the dream, fits the ideal, fits what should be right? And no matter how much is stolen by people, Girrawah is still interested in standing up and saying, I'll follow the rules. I want to come and borrow money from the people who stole that money, and I want to buy the land from people that stole the land, and I want to become a farmer. And so this is turning that story into a reality. And so that's a little part of what I'll share. Because if we go to the current paradigm, the current whitefella approach of borrowing money, this is a result we see. This is a whitefella loan. And this is ultimately where Girrawah doesn't want to go. Because at the end of the day, what sort of farmer wants to do that to their livestock? What sort of loan forces a farmer to do that to their livestock? What sort of financing forces farmers into despair? So that is not where we want to go with this financing. And what sort of farming expects the government to bail out the financing when things go wrong so they can pay the banks back their loan? And if people don't really understand that, the Regional Investment Corporation is a $3 billion investment bank to bail out farmers with interest-free loans funded by the taxpayer. Things have got to change. So if we want to farm country properly in this country, we need to listen to the 65,000-year-old story. We need to be clever. We need to have ears. We need to listen. We need to design a finance that fits that story. It's not hard, okay? We need to find a finance that allows an Indigenous farmer to still respect mother, to not hurt mother, that understands the unpredictability of climate. That 60,000-year-old story understood that. It managed that. We need a loan that's got Yinjamara, respect. So we went and designed one. Not all by ourselves. We actually entrusted some of the work with some fellows at ANU. Some of you are young enough to know this guy, Bruce Chapman. So Emeritus Professor Bruce Chapman designed and implemented HEX when he was in Keating's office. And his PhD student, who's now Assistant Professor Tim Higgins, along with ABARES, have been doing some initial work for us around testing how we build an Indigenous-designed financing model. And we're not going to give you the formulas, that's down the track. But we will show you the picture and show you how it actually works. So that picture up on the board is accumulated profits. It's the passing on of intergenerational wealth. And if it's not obvious, I put a circle around where we put the drought. And you can see that if you are forcing farmers to keep on paying back a loan, no matter what the weather is, they are going to lose money during a drought. And that's the red line. The blue line is if you listen to mother, you design a loan for mother, to respect mother, and so all of a sudden, you're only paying back the loan when mother's gifting you the goods from Mother Earth. And when she's not, and when she's stressed, you're not paying back. And guess which farmer, after the drought, is still on the country? The one with the Mother Earth loan. Because old mate banker's gone, geez, we love you, but you're not paying back the loan. You haven't got the government money, so goodbye. And that journey to there is a journey of despair. Because which farmer in this world really wants to flog country when it can't be flogged? So let's change the dial. And this is a model of a cattle farm. Standard loan versus Indigenous-Designed loan. That's the result you get. The accumulated profit, the intergenerational wealth of maintaining, nurturing that country is pretty much the same at the end, but the results at the beginning tell the stark story. And for people not thinking we're going to see another drought for any time soon, good luck. So we've designed a product very simply, and we've got a little bit more work to do in terms of a bit more complex maths, a bit more stress testing, a bit more of that. But this is also a loan that is the original sustainable financing loan. Because this is a loan that doesn't need to pay you for carbon and it doesn't need you to pay for biodiversity because it's already embedded in the way that you farm, because the way we finance influences the way we farm. So if I'm already respectful of country, if I'm already nurturing the country because that's how I pay back my loan, isn't that a better way of doing it? And for an Indigenous farmer, you're not fighting the country, you're loving it, and it's loving you back. So that's all we've done. We put a whole lot of words up there to tell you why it's so good, but hopefully you've got to that part of the story already. But just think about, this is a story about not a handout. This is not a story about waiting for charity. This is a story about an Aboriginal person walking into a bank and saying, I want one of those Indigenous loans, the one that was designed by Indigenous people. So it's not Indigenous finance, it's Indigenous-Designed finance. It's taking the 60,000-year story, it's sticking it in a whole lot of stochastic calculus and getting a really smart loan product at the end. It's all bankable. So somebody that tells you it's too hard, they're lying. This is actually not that hard, and it's been already modelled. And we're investing a bit more time to get the modelling even more complex. So everybody that comes up and says, what about this or what about that, we've got the answer. But the other part to this, not only for just Indigenous farmers, but think for all farmers who are facing increasing unpredictability about climate. We're seeing health issues out in regional and rural Australia. That is a real problem, and that is being that whole loan anxiety. If we can take that out, if we can get farmers loving country and loving what they're doing, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, that's got to be a better thing for this country. And if we don't have to subsidise people to do the right thing because it's already as part of the way they farm, and again, we're modelling cattle farming. So this is not something that we're not already doing. It's not something different to where we want to go, but we just do it better. If we're modelling that and saying we can still pay back loans and still be profitable, why aren't we adopting this? And why isn't a financial institution up here telling you this? Because we're not a bank. We want to support Girrawah, and Murray's in the audience as well. We're here to help his journey to be owner of freehold title and show a way for other Aboriginal people to be owners of freehold title, to build the agrarian economy for Aboriginal people, to participate in intergenerational wealth. We want to be in the farming business, but we've got to be in the education business first to show people what the loans got to look like to farm better. Because current farming is not doing the right thing by country or by people. And I think if I could call upon Mr. House to bring down the House for the last couple of minutes.
Yep. So Mandangu, Chris.
Mandangu.
Waluwin Mayan, Waluwin Nurumbango, healthy people, healthy country. Mambawara na minyago, Wura Gabinya, Wura Daraigo, Winingala go Baligo. Looking to see, listening to hear, and learning to understand. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Girrawah. Thank you, Chris. That was an extraordinary story. And how inspiring that you can take a systemic barrier that's so, critical to the way we can build self-empowerment and build that back in as a simple way of banking to evolve and taking into account the change in nature. So that was just unbelievable. Thank you so much again. All right, let's transition to the next story. I won't give too much away for this one, but this one's all about tackling the biodiversity crisis. And I'd like to welcome Lisa Miller, the CEO and founder of Wedgetail, to the stage. Welcome, Lisa.
Wow, that was an incredible story, and I'm privileged to share the stage with Chris and Girrawah and Sasha, who's next, and Tim. And also so excited to have the conversations I think we're going to have all about purpose in the next couple of days with all of you. I just wanted to acknowledge that Wedgetail was founded on the lands of the Palawa in Lutruwita, Tasmania, and I pay my respects to their Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. So this is a statistic from the Living Planet report that WWF released last year, and it's a heartbreaking statistic that there has been an average 69% decrease in monitored wildlife populations since 1970. Think about that, the last 50 or so years. And I've got a koala on this slide, they're very iconic, but when I studied conservation biology in the late 90s, we used to do a lot of modelling with koalas because they were seen as a stable population of native animals. Fast forward to 2022, the koala is now endangered in the ACT, Queensland and New South Wales, something we just couldn't have imagined then. This is a slightly different statistic around getting to think about land use, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of these. And I've just mentioned Australia, 55% of the land here is used for agriculture. In England, UK I should say, 69% of the land is used for agriculture. You can look at lots of other stats around the world, it's often around 50%. And this should get us all thinking about agriculture being a major driver of habitat loss and the biodiversity crisis, but also how are we feeding our human population as it grows. And this really talks to all the sectors, the businesses, the industries that have to come together to have these discussions around biodiversity. And it's these stats that kind of got me thinking, not these exact ones, but I've been reading a bit, obviously looking at them in 2019, what also happened in 2019 was that there was a catastrophic fires that I think many of you would have experienced, those black summer fires that hit the east coast of Australia. And what we all witnessed in that event was obviously human tragedy, so there were human lives lost and human property lost, but it's estimated that 3 billion animals were displaced or died during those fires. And that's just all of us witnessing a big biodiversity loss event in one moment. And that really activated me. It got me thinking around all these things that I was reading and witnessing that, and I thought, how can I make a difference to the biodiversity crisis? I'm going to go a little bit back. So this is a bit of a 20-year journey around, I studied zoology and evolutionary biology at university, hence my conservation biology. And I then was really fortunate to get a job at the Australian Museum. It's the Natural History Museum here in Sydney, and I got to work alongside ichthyologists, arachnologists, mammalogists, all the ologists, and then I also got to work in the web team. And it was the time of Web 2.0, there was a lot of excitement in the tech industry, and I actually transferred careers at that time. I started working in web teams for agencies, big corporates. I ran my own business a few times, and then ultimately in 2017, I went into a startup called Canva. I was employee number 70 or so, and I started growing the growth team there. We went from 5 people in that growth team to 190, so we did a good job growing, and then I went on to work and help develop the product team. But like I said, the fires in 2019 really got me thinking, how could I take that tech career and the things I'd learned, especially from a place like Canva, where you push beyond your limits, you think about global problems, and bring them back to the biodiversity crisis, bring them back to some of the science I had. Also, at that time of 2020, COVID enabled my family and I to move to Tasmania, and this allowed me to connect with Indigenous Australians, conservationists, farmers, producers, all these people actually in landscapes, and really understand what are the barriers for them not being able to do nature-positive work in these places. And as has already been talked about already, it was very clear to me from reading all the reports, but then also working with people in the landscape, that our systems are broken, and I think that's why we're all here, right? Our systems are broken because nature is not being accounted for in the economic systems that drive our lives. It's not being considered inside that our global economy actually sits inside our biosphere. It sits inside nature. $44 trillion, half the world's GDP, is meant to be, or is said by economists to be partially or totally dependent on nature and its services. Yet we still allow businesses and others to degrade the environment. One other stat around our systems of ocean, and Girrawah talked to this much more eloquently than I can, is that 80% of the remaining biodiversity in the world is actually in Indigenous hands. They have cared for it. And yet we still extract the wealth from them, and we do not support them to keep their trees standing, to keep their rivers healthy and their grasslands diverse. There is a lot of hope, though, even though I've just presented all these statistics, and I'm very hopeful for all the reasons that nature itself is regenerative. And with help, nature can regenerate itself. So we need to move from this nature negative world into a nature positive world. And there's a lot of action now being taking place. The Global Biodiversity Framework was signed by around 200 countries late last year, and that has already created a lot of energy towards the 2030 goals. Other things that have now come out of that framework are the TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which I think Sasha will talk to a bit in a minute. But these frameworks are coming, and businesses are starting to pay attention and start to look at what are their impacts on nature, what are the risks, what should they be thinking about, and how can they be actually part of the solution. One of the gaps, though, is a huge funding gap. So this is a challenge that we all need to overcome, and the Global Biodiversity Framework estimates this is around $700 billion each year as we head towards 2030. Now, this is a huge amount of money by all of our standards, but it's actually a fraction of the global GDP. It's 0.7%, so it's very doable for all of us. And in fact, if most countries change their subsidies that currently degrade nature, so lots of governments have subsidies that actively help in the degradation of nature, whether in agriculture and other places, to nature-positive ones, we'd probably get halfway there. So that brings me back to our mission at Wedgetail. Our mission is to conserve and restore biodiversity through sustainable investment. We are wanting to help finance this transition. Basically, we're taking a whole ecosystem approach, so we're deploying all different types of capital into all different types of projects, communities, businesses, and really trying to accelerate the transition as we head towards 2030. We do a lot of different pieces, but I'm going to focus quickly on nature-linked loans. So our nature-linked loans are really about working with businesses that can conserve and restore landscapes. And so they can have a positive impact in these places. And we look for returns not just in financial capital in our loans, but we look for returns in natural capital and social capital. What we have inside our loans is what we call nature triggers, and they're developed through a nature positive framework that we've developed, and they're very specific to where the loan is. But when the triggers are achieved, the interest rate decreases on that loan quite significantly. Like I said, we do other things. We also do equity and we also do grants, but we're really hot on loans right now. And some of the reasons for that is, firstly, it's really fast-moving capital. Equity can take a while. We can deploy a loan tomorrow. It can go out and have those impacts on the landscape. Activities can happen. Biodiversity outcomes can be achieved. And it can flow back to us, and then it can go back into another project or another business. Working with farmers is something that we do a lot because, as I said at the start, agriculture has a huge impact on biodiversity. And so we're working with a lot of farmers around the world, and they really like loans. It's a type of debt capital that they're very used to. Their business models suit it, and so it works well. And lastly, loans bring a business mindset to what things that might have been done by philanthropy in the past, environmental work. So we still do philanthropy ourselves. We encourage there needs to be a huge more amount of philanthropy happening in these environmental spaces. But loans really look for how those communities sustain themselves and sustain the environment in which they live in. And this loan model brings that to them. Getting down into the details, we have worked a lot in cacao. It's really an interesting space because you can do cacao agriculture in a really nature-positive way or in a really nature-negative way. And so our first loans have really got into this space in Central and South America and Africa and other places like that. Our first loan is a loan that we did with Zorzal. And I'm talking about this loan because it's 1 year old. So what we've managed to do with Zorzal is we have a 5-year loan because outcomes in nature take a little while. And in that first year, we have each year we lend them $500,000 worth of working capital, USD. And they pay that, draw it down, buy the cacao, work with their communities to buy that product, pay the farmers a premium. And alongside that, we have the nature trigger, which is achieving bird-friendly certification on their farms. This certification comes from the Smithsonian, and basically it has a whole lot of scientific backing around canopy structures, canopy cover, microhabitats, epiphytes on trees, and a whole lot of other things. And so we've used that as a nature trigger in this loan. So not only did they take down $500,000, they repaid it, they repaid the interest, and they achieved 256.7 hectares of bird-friendly certified farms in that year. And alongside that, we also had outcomes for farmers in terms of being paid a premium, and we're monitoring how the livelihood outcomes develop for the whole community. So our vision at Wedgetail is to be that small wedge of leading capital. We really want to try out the technologies, the nature-positive business models, and demonstrate to others and banks, and I'm glad Sasha's following me as a bank, how these things can be done so more money can transition into these spaces and really start to see this gap be filled. We have a deeper purpose around all of us knowing that we are part of nature, and this movement that I think we're all talking about this week, from the Anthropocene to the Symbiocene, and how we do that as quickly as possible. The last thing I just wanted to mention was that this is a job for all of us. I obviously had a background in science, but I believe whether you're an HR professional and you're thinking about your capability frameworks at work, you should be thinking about climate, nature, and sustainability in those. If you're a lawyer, you can work. If you work in government, there's a lot of policy work to be done. If you can work on new types of contracts like the nature ones that we have. If you're a technologist, there's a huge amount of work to be done in the monitoring, reporting, and verification space to make these markets really high integrity. There's so many other places, but I'd also say it's in our votes and it's in how we hold government accountable. There's lots of interesting policies up with the federal government right now, and I really think that we should continue to press to make sure that we get good outcomes in our nature spaces. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was powerful. What really struck me about that presentation was that so many of the finance mechanisms and the economy is actually built to extract wealth from nature and First Nations people. So how do we shift that and take up Lisa's challenge to build things that are nature and culture positive, not nature and culture negative? And that's about building new finance mechanisms and being accountable for those different things to design new ways that embed those things back into the community, back into nature, and reconnecting the economy back to a thriving state. I'd like to introduce our third speaker now, so Sasha Courville from Bank Australia. I'm sure you're all aware of Bank Australia's work, and I'm really excited about hearing about Sasha, about some of the new things they're starting to think about and embed across Bank Australia. So welcome Sasha to the stage.
Music. All right, music and everything. Hi, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Gadigal land and that sovereignty was never ceded. For those of you that don't know much about Bank Australia, there's a little bit of information up on here. I wasn't going to say anything about it, but today is the International Day for Banking on Values. So I do want to draw attention to that we're a really proud member of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, GABV. In terms of my background, I have spent my entire career working on different ways to address sustainability, largely through the lens of business, across a number of different sectors, disciplines, and industries. And I've spent the last 11 years in the finance sector because, as I think we've heard a few times today, if you want to change the world, finance is key. From Bank Australia's perspective, when we are thinking about driving positive impact, we're looking at 4 key areas. They're on the screen: climate action, nature and biodiversity, First Nations reconciliation, and affordable and accessible housing. These are issues that we're focused on because they are priority issues for our customers. They're also areas where we think we can play a positive role in contributing to change. It's important to note that these issues are not understood as separate silos, but we're looking at the connections between all of them. And it's really where we'll have the most impact, is if we can find the connections between them. We spend a lot of time talking about climate action. It is the #1 issue our customers feel that it's important to them. However, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more about climate action in the lead up to COP28 in Dubai later this month, but climate action is one area among others. And today I'm really going to be focusing on nature and biodiversity. The Stockholm Resilience Centre has this concept around planetary boundaries. How many people have seen this work before? Great, perfect. It's about half-half. Climate is one of these global processes, of 9 global processes that regulate the stability and the resilience of the Earth system. But it's only one, right? And over the last number of decades, we've crossed 6 of those 9 boundaries of those global processes. So we are operating well outside the safe operating space for humanity, not to mention other species. So it's really critical that we take action. Another way to look at it is bending the curve on biodiversity loss has been popularized since the last couple of years in work on global biodiversity frameworks. But it's not enough. Clearly business as usual is going to take us to a very gray place. But even increasing conservation efforts is not going to be enough. We also need to change the way we produce and consume. We have to change the economic system. This is a bit of a busy slide. It's also a draft slide. It's from our new nature and biodiversity strategy that we have not yet published. So you're getting a sneak peek of this. But really, to be able to explain what we're thinking of from Bank Australia's perspective in terms of our role in contributing to nature and biodiversity protection, I thought the theory of change would be a really helpful way to look at it. And if you think of the far right side of the screen, we see these 2 big goals. Okay, increased protection of nature and the economy transition to nature positive. From Bank Australia's perspective, there's 2 key levers that we can play to contribute to those broader global goals. One is directly through what we can influence, what we can work through the power of our people, our customers, products and services that can move us towards nature positive outcomes. The other is collaborative outcomes or indirect outcomes. Because we are customer-owned and because we developed a value proposition to our customers around using money to create positive change in the world, we can do things differently. We can experiment, we can play, we can think differently and create new products and services. And hopefully, like what's happened in the community housing space and in green home loans, hopefully others will pay attention and they'll copy us, others in the financial sector. So that's one way to contribute to indirect change through our actions encouraging others to take action. As we're learning through these things, we'll also figure out a whole range of ways in which we can contribute to enabling policy environments or shaping new markets that we desperately need. This whole approach is focusing on testing, learning, experimentation, sharing results. We're going to make a few mistakes. There's going to be things that we're not going to get right, but we'll share them and we'll learn. It's a new area. It's the only way to move forward, and we're actively playing in this space. There are 3 key action areas for our strategy. One is around awareness and engagement. Another one we call leadership, but it's that experimentation side of things. And the last one is products and services. And I'm going to give one quick example of each of those. So in terms of awareness and engagement, and I think this was mentioned at the very beginning of the day, people won't take action to protect nature unless they feel connected to it. So awareness and engagement is so critical. And back in 2008, we were the first bank in the world to invest in a reserve. It's in the Western Wimmera in Victoria, and it's an amazing place. I didn't quite realize it when I joined Bank Australia about 20 months ago, but this has been an absolute differentiator for our people. Getting out on trips to the reserve, learning about it, having that deep connection. And I'm convinced that that's been one of the key reasons why we've been able to push things further and really take nature and biodiversity on as a key challenge and opportunity for us. With our partners in the reserve, which include Greening Australia, Trust for Nature, and the Burrinjugadjin Land Council, we've been doing a lot of work to care for country, protect endangered species, experiment with climate-smart regenerative practices, as well as demonstrate the value of traditional cool burning practices. This is the mouth twister, which Lisa alluded to. What we're doing in the leadership space, one of the things we're working on this year is to apply the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures to Bank Australia. So this is modeled off of its kind of big sister, or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which took 10 years to develop. The TNFD took 2, so it's moving more quickly. But the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures ultimately requires us to do 2 things. It requires us to think about, as a given organization, what are your impacts and what are your dependencies on nature? How do you measure them? And then, how do you reduce, how do you minimize those impacts, recognizing the dependencies, and then move towards a nature-positive outcome? We're still in the early stages of doing this. We're in the early stages of doing most of what I'm talking about today. But what we've learned so far is that there's probably 2 key areas where we're going to have significant impacts on nature for us. First of all, it's going to be in our own operations. So head office is one example, our building in Collingwood in Melbourne. And we can map out what those impacts are and what the dependencies are. But like in our climate action strategy, we think that the biggest impacts we're going to have is in our mortgage book. So like in our climate action strategy, over 90% of our emissions come from the loans to our customers and those mortgages. It's going to be the same with nature and biodiversity. So we then need to think about how do we measure those impacts, collect that data, and then have that baseline, which is what we're doing this year, and then think about, well, how do we then start to work through products and services and insights that minimize the impact and move us to nature-positive products and services? So that's work we're starting this year. Now, we're going to look a little bit different to everybody else that has put up a TNFD report because we have this reserve. And the TNFD, despite their best efforts, they do talk now that it's about opportunities, but it is largely a risk-based framework. And so thinking about how do we project and communicate the work we're doing on the positive side while also showing what are the negative aspects of our operations, of our customers, et cetera. So those are things that we'll wrestle through this year, but we'll be sharing that and hoping others will follow suit. I don't have a pretty slide on our products and services, so we're just going back to the theory of change. But in terms of products and services, we're a bank. So being able to drive finance to where it's needed most is going to be a really critical vehicle for us to have impact. Now, we're learning. This is early days for us. But what we've done so far is to back mission-driven organizations to acquire land and transition it to more sustainable uses. This includes using carbon markets as a revenue source, but recognizing much broader benefits, including biodiversity and cultural outcomes as well. We've done this to date through direct impact lending, as well as through loan facilities to impact investment funds. We are also in dialogue with traditional owner groups who are working on plans to buy back country so that Aboriginal organizations, people can be on country, looking after country, and enabling them to carry out traditional and contemporary cultural practices, as well as develop economic opportunities, which we've heard is so critical. So that's a little bit about what we're working on. We're in the early stages of the journey, but we're really happy to share everything as we go along and to learn from others as we go. The last thing I was asked to do was to flag what can everybody do if you want to take action on nature and biodiversity. So one, talk to your bank. Ask your bank what are they doing to address nature and biodiversity. What are they actively doing to understand their impacts and dependencies and make positive change? Number two, if you're a business, take a look at that task force on nature-related financial disclosures, the TNFD. It has a LEAP framework that helps guide people through the steps of how do you start to think about your impacts and dependencies. And once you understand that, then you can start to work on plans to minimize them and move towards nature-positive outcomes. And the last one is if you're interested or working through carbon and biodiversity kind of projects and you're interested in impact lending, please come talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Take a seat. I'd like to invite the other speakers onto the stage, and while I just kind of briefly reflect on Sasha's amazing talk about how, I think we've all can agree that how critical finance is in order to make change happen. And we probably have all the tools that we need in order to make this change happen, but we almost need to test, discover, and learn, and measure, and evolve to where we need to get to. So thank you so much for that. Speakers went a little over, which I allowed them to, so that's fine. We've got about 15 minutes of discussion now, so it's really exciting to have everybody on the stage. I like to doodle a little bit when I'm listening, and I just really was interested in the systems change that was emerging through the conversations. And so I looked for things like structures, intervention points, outcomes, and actions. And it was pretty evident there was commonalities between all the speakers, and actually I got quite excited about potentially how they could all collaborate together in terms of the work. So we might get to that afterwards. But I was really interested, again, just probably where we were talking initially about how finance can influence the way people farm or the way they act, and re-changing that. And it's something that Chris can talk about later around this idea of not systems change. It's about there's a different part of systems returning to where it's sort of the actions and outcomes it wants to drive. Talking about how designing loans need to be in line with mother or country or the actions you're trying to take, and linking finance to really drive those outcomes. And I think that was really powerful. And if you take Lisa's talk, that really built on that and talked about that extraction of wealth from both nature and the First Nations people, and how do you make that transitions to really build those outcomes as part of that system. And then ultimately, what Sasha was talking about, the mainstream banking system, and how you can take finance and redefine it, and inspire it, and change it, and ultimately build that nature-positive outcome. So I'll share the doodle on Snack, but I thought that was kind of helpful to kind of build towards that. But what I'd like to do, we've got about 8 minutes, but I firstly just want to ask a couple of questions to the group. The first is just reflecting on that conversation. What were your kind of key takeouts from the other two groups that you listened to? And a second follow-up question, which is, what actions can this group of amazing people take in order to support the work you're doing? So I might ask Girrawah to go first.
Yeah, I think it's about relationship building for our people. Most Indigenous or most non-Aboriginal people in this country have never met an Aboriginal person, don't have a relationship, never met an Aboriginal person, and what they know about us and our country and our people is all stereotyped, essentially stereotyped through, a colonial educational experience. So there's a lot of relationship building to happen across the landscape. So it's about, forming relationships with our people, solid, genuine relationships, on the ground. I think through our elders and through our, the old people is very important, instead of through governments. People need to come and have relationships directly with our people and country.
And any reflections from the other two speakers that you took away?
I think it's wonderful, actually. Naturally, I'm going to say that. I think there's a great opportunity for our people to create intergenerational wealth in partnership with institutions or organisations. But I think the important thing is that it has to be done in a mutually respectful way, but also it has to be done, on Aboriginal terms as well. It just can't be a one-way street, as we see all the time in this country. being told what to do and how to do it and when to do it. So, opening the farm gate, essentially. How hard is it for an Aboriginal person in this country to open and shut the farm gate on their terms? Yeah.
Powerful, thank you so much. Really important design principles for anything we're looking to build. Maybe over to Sasha, similar question, reflections, actions.
Yeah.
Love to hear it.
Well, I think what struck me from all the presentations and the discussion was just, it's such an exciting time. And we need new models, right? But we have models. We have things that work. We have things that are in play. And we need to play with them. We need to use them. We need to demonstrate them. And we need to collaborate and share. Because that's the only way we're going to kind of build kind of a future where we all feel enabled, empowered, protecting nature and biodiversity. And so I think that that's really, really critical. So I just can't wait for other conversations to happen with all of us in terms of what we can learn from each other.
Yeah, I think the exciting time for the conditions that we've got and the tools that we've got to actually build something new, but it's about being brave to take it.
Yeah.
How about you, Chris?
Wow. I think in all of this, and if we look through the farm lens, but we can look through any business lens, what we've done over the last 200 years is bifurcate sort of farming and nature as being something that's different. Prior to that, it was country, and that just sustained everything, and it's listening, and it's just not about getting Girrawah or anybody else to do a welcome to country and that's thanks, goodbye. It's actually, well, let's do some deep listening of what does that actually mean when we start designing things. And I guess why we landed in finance is because it's a conversation where Aboriginal people have never been invited in and heard about actually how it could influence. And so you take this notion of saying, well, farming and environment shouldn't be bifurcated. You do them together, and this sort of, so it stops becoming opposed. And I sort of reflect on everything here, and there's a real sort of commonality of, don't tell me, show me. Let's just cut through the talk, because there's plenty out there, and we could fill rooms for years on all the talk about this stuff. Why don't we just go and do it? I love let's go test it. Let's go trial it. Let's put a little bit in and see what comes back, because I can guarantee it'll all be positive. But we got to take a step.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. It's about taking that bravery and that action. Actually, let's try it and learn from it. And listen. Deep listening is critical from all the stories that we've told about how to actually build new solutions. Lisa, I'd love to hear your reflections.
Well, I think just following on from Chris, so we're in our 7th loan. So that was the first one, and I spoke about that one because it's been fully repaid. The others are in process and are being repaid as well. And we're really experimenting, and we're going into what's considered risky places, but it's not necessarily risky. It's just a lot of finance isn't there. They call it the missing middle. So there's 50,000 to 500,000 amount of finance in lots of geographies around the world. And we're seeing great reception to it. People in Ecuador, with one of the loans that we've done there, said this is the first time they've seen someone value their land and how they think about their land and allow them to farm in the way that they want to farm. And so we're getting great reception from it, but we're a very small, we can only do so many loans. And so I really would encourage, like you said, others to stop having the conversations, move into these spaces and think about these missing middle spaces. It's not just grants and small bits, and there's big funds that can deploy a lot of capital, but then they actually can't get into these places where a lot of these farmers and producers are working. So I'm pretty excited by what's going on. We've also done some work in Australia, but I haven't had a chance to talk to that today. So I talked to the global stuff, but keen for conversations afterwards as well.
Yeah, awesome, amazing. Well, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I just, I really appreciate those reflections and a lot of lessons in that for all of us. I was having a conversation actually on Monday with an emerging elder Indigenous man, and I asked his permission to ask this question. He was reflecting on what happened with the voice, and he was talking about the deep pain that come from the no vote for himself as an individual. And he was reflecting on massive changes that happened in the past, big social movements, big things. And he was sort of thinking, well, how patient do we need to be? What change do we need to create? And how might we blow the system up? And it was more of a thought experiment. So on behalf of him, I'd like to ask this question. Obviously, the work that you're doing is extraordinary and it's changing, and the pace with which we need to do it needs to speed up. But his question is actually, what would a big, audacious move look like to shift the systems? What would the next sort of massive social movement change to sort of look at both the inequity and Indigenous and builds true self-empowerment and also the nature challenge we've got ahead of us? What might that look like? Where could we really shift that system quickly? And I know I've sprung this question on you at the end, but I'd pretty much just invite anyone to jump in and respond to that.
Yeah, I might just comment on what we call the white follow common law book in this country. Essentially, it was created by non-Aboriginal people, the white founding fathers, who deliberately omitted us from the table, our voice. There were no Aboriginal people sitting around part of that consultation process and the creation of that document. So essentially, to us, it's a racist document that deliberately omits us from participating in, enjoying the wealth and prosperity like everyone else in this country. So I personally think, in a way, a good thing. It's good not to be acknowledged in a racist white document. Do we need to be there? We can wait. We can keep waiting. We can keep waiting and build intergenerational wealth without the common law book. And then, we need to activate the levers to create First Nation intergenerational wealth. We have the assets, we have the country, we have the provenance story. So one thing missing from, I suppose, the big story here is the provenance story that we hold. We hold the cultural, intellectual property to all this. We are the owners, we're the custodians of this, but we have to be able to come and sit at the table and be a part of that. I do think we need a new constitution, by the way. I think we need a document that acknowledges why should 97% of this country decide whether we should be recognised in a way that's... Thank you. A lot of the family and elders, think, why is it up to the majority of this country to decide whether we're recognised or not? I mean, that's... we should be recognised, regardless of a constitution. And, there's a lot, in hindsight, we can look now and think, we should have went down that road or this road, Murru, creating pathways, or Murrawarru on track that way. So there is hope, there is, we have a legacy. Our old people, there's a reason why we're all here is because our old people looked after this country for tens of thousands of years for you to be able to run your project, to look at nature and talk about Yibay Mullion, which is a wedgetail, and talk about the conservation block that Bank Australia purchased. It's there because our people were the custodians and owned it, never ceded sovereignty, and there you have it, That has to be acknowledged. So it's about acknowledging, respect and honouring the old people and being able to take the current generation into your story and your journey as well. So.
Yeah, beautifully said. And we talked earlier about, or one of you mentioned earlier about building those pathways, but also those connective points and what can we do to make that true recognition possible in order to build from there. And I think there's a long way to go, but it's definitely a powerful way of explaining it, so appreciate that. Would anyone else like to jump in about their kind of big, audacious
I'll just,
component?
now you've spoken up, just the way that we think about funding things. I mean, what the beauty of today's been is about borrowing money and paying it back. Let's decouple from the charitable, the club that dictates how the drip feeding money comes out for other benefit. Let's design a loan that empowers people to actually go borrow it, pay it back, in doing the good. And if we generate a respectful finance as opposed to one that suits institutions, we're decoupling the power base, and that's from philanthropic to government programs and everything. And so, you and I talk a lot about, nation building has to develop sovereign wealth. And that sovereignty has to build its own wealth. Because if it doesn't, it's just looking like another big government program. And that wealth in Australia was built from an agrarian base, from a farm base, and then it can extend into other businesses But that's where it's hard is, because that's making money from country and showing people how to do that without hurting country. And once as a nation we get over this sort of drip feed and an English loan approach which says, well, it's got to, you got to get your units in this time, that's not how the country operates. When we get over that hurdle and go, well, this country operates in a completely different way, let's listen to that, let's design our finance to do that. In farming means you don't have to kill the first metre of soil to get your regular return, to get what you know you're going to have to get. We can move to healing that first metre and everything else that comes out of it. So the finance conversation is a big shift change because we don't have it. We just assume it's an immovable beast. But it's dynamic. You can do anything to it. Just go ask for it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think, reflecting on that, it's also about how you change the power structures that finance has over those individuals as well. And actually, you'd argue that it'd actually be better for a bank if there was a climate event or a biodiversity loss or a weather event, and actually that actually reduced the risk of default. So it'd actually be better for the balance sheet for that bank. So it just makes common sense.
It makes sense because it worked for 60,000 years, and people talk about First Nations economy, and there's words for money in Wiradjuri. So let's just open up to the fact that if you can run an economy for 60,000 years, let's listen to that. Let's design back for that. And let's see how we incorporate that into what we're doing. And it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, it's just making it better.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We are at time, but I'm going to take the liberty of asking Lisa and Sasha to sort of share their last reflection on those audacious pieces. Yeah.
I'll go quickly and then you go. I'll reflect globally and say, I think, like you said, the TNFD was developed in 2 years instead of 10. There's a lot of momentum, and that last slide where I said it's everybody's job, I really meant it. So there's a lot of activity happening that everyone can get a part of, everyone can bring it into their roles. And like you said, there's a lot of government work that needs to happen in all sorts of legislation that values First Nations and then also nature and how we integrate this all back. But I think there's momentum at the moment, so I'd encourage everyone to further that and really think about it in everything that you're doing in your personal lives and corporate or business or whatever lives, to be able to integrate nature into the things that you're thinking about.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Lisa.
And lucky last.
Last, as everyone was talking, and I think Lisa, it's something you mentioned around risk, and we're talking a lot about finance, and finance is a business around risk management. We're just not understanding risk well enough. We have a blinded view of the range of risks that we need to be addressing, and we're not thinking about the risks of inaction or the risks of not changing. And so I think if we could start there and think a little bit differently around what are the broader social, environmental risks, governance risks, equity risks that we're not factoring in, we're wearing the costs, right? Like society as a whole is wearing those costs. How do we factor that in so that we're making better decisions? And that should be the role of finance.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. Well, we're just over time, and I'd just love to thank our extraordinary guests. The conversation, I hope you all got something out of that, and I think it's challenged us to really rethink the way our economies and businesses work, and obviously, let's redesign finance so it builds the outcomes that we want to achieve. So thank you so much, everybody.
Good on you, mate.